Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to CRCtalks. I'm Marianne Pearson, Senior Director of Patient and Family Navigation at the Colorectal Cancer Alliance. CRCtalks is an alliance program to amplify critical conversations that happen between providers and patients. We hold 6 CRC talks 6 times a year are on various topics from treatment to survivorship, plus screening and everything in between. Watch the Alliance's social media channels and email newsletters to get any updates. We're so glad that you could join us today. This afternoon's program is brought to you by our generous corporate supporters, Amgen, Merck, and Takeda Oncology. And thank you so much for your support. A few housekeeping items before we begin. We will reserve some time at the end of the program to answer any questions you may have. You can ask your questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will also get to as many questions as we can. Following the talk, you will be directed to a short 1-minute survey. We really appreciate your participation in that, as we really try to listen to the interests of our participants and build our programs around that. Have your phones ready today. Our presenter today will ask you to scan a QR code to participate in a live polling. To scan a QR code, open up your phone's camera and point it at the screen. Then click the link that pops up. And then finally, to watch this and all of our CRC talks later, you can find it on the Colorectal Cancer Alliance website. Just search CRC talks in your favorite browser. We are starting today's CRC talks a little bit differently with a video featuring our first guest, Christy Williams.
My name is Christy, and I am married to my husband Trey, and we have 3 children, 2 daughters and a boy in the middle, and we live in Charlotte, North Carolina. During a well check, my internist recommended that I have a colonoscopy based on a family history. I was feeling great, really wasn't symptomatic, or so I thought, and put off the colonoscopy. And a few months went by, and I was very much symptomatic by this point, and ended up going in and having a colonoscopy. And I had some cramping and a little bit of bleeding, and it was pretty consistent. And right then and there was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. When the physician told me that he found a tumor and that I had colorectal cancer, I honestly thought he was talking to the wrong patient. My husband was with me, and we were just holding hands and through tears trying to take in everything that he was sharing with us.
I was in a complete state of shock. I thought there was no way this could happen. She's too young, she's too healthy.
My mind immediately went to my 3 young children. I just wanted to jump on it immediately. So an hour later, I was having blood work. The very next day, which was a Saturday, I was having a CT scan. And I wanted to know where the best centers were, not even just in the country, but internationally. After selecting the center for my care, I had a colon resection. The pathology from that showed that I had several lymph nodes that had cancer in them. And upon starting chemotherapy just prior, I was scanned, and it was confirmed without question that the cancer had metastasized to my liver, which put me in stage 4. And I still refer to that as the worst day of my life. My oncologist wanted to have my tumor tested for biomarkers to determine if I was a candidate for targeted therapy. It's a roller coaster. I mean, you have highs, you have lows. I had days where I literally just wanted to go for a jog, and there were days where I was lying on the floor in my bathroom and sobbing because I just didn't know what the future held. I actually continued working through my whole cancer journey, staying active and being surrounded by others. was good for me and brought me a lot of joy. It became really my mission to connect with other patients that were newly diagnosed and share my story and really empower them to be their own advocate and request biomarker testing. Everyone should be given the opportunity to have biomarker testing, and I found a local group, and it's just patients talking to patients, and that to me really changed my journey because I was getting to know people that had already been through it, and that was my goal, ringing the bell and getting to the other side of it.
Wow, thank you so much, Christy, for telling your story. And thank you so much for joining us today. We want to get into the basics of biomarker testing in a moment, but for the benefit of our viewers, I'd like to ask you a couple questions, of follow-up questions about your video. What mutation did your biomarker testing reveal?
Yes, thanks for having me.
Sure.
So yes, the biomarker testing revealed the mutation was wild RAS. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And what did that mean to your treatment?
So it's interesting. When as said in the video, when I found out that the cancer had metastasized to my liver, it was really just the darkest day of my life. Because we knew that put me in stage 4. We knew that the 5-year survival rate was 5%, and that was so hard to stomach. And I just wanted to be as aggressive as I could.
Right.
And I remember my GI oncologist saying, because it's now metastasized, we have the option. We actually save the tumors, which was news to me. So he said, we can test that tumor and see if it's the right type of cancer for a targeted based therapy. And I don't think he even had to finish what he was saying. I was interrupting him saying, yes, do it. Absolutely. Everything. Let's just throw the kitchen sink at it. So I remember a little bit of a description of, hey, if it's, RAS, we would take this route, but it would take a little bit of time, whether it be a few days or a couple weeks to get those results. But yeah, that's pretty much the approach to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Couldn't be better. Yes. So let's see, February will be 5 years for me from finishing treatment.
Wonderful.
And
Yeah.
we have just started the party planning. There will be a very big celebration. But I'm as healthy as can be. I'm on no medication. Not long into my journey, when I had a scan, the hope and prayer was maybe that the tumors would be shrinking. But in fact, there was no evidence of cancer present. And that I still refer to as the best day of my life.
Yes,
and so we continued
absolutely.
on with treatment. And I'm just so grateful that we did, because I'm as healthy as can be today.
Oh, wonderful. Oh my gosh, such good news. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm so glad you're here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Um, Christy is going to stay on through the program and will be part of the Q&A later. So if you have any questions for her specifically, please note that in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. And then now maybe all this talk about biomarkers is a little over your head. That's okay, because we have probably the best person in the country to make sense for you. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Christopher Lieu. Dr. Lieu is a medical oncologist who is the co-director of GI Medical Oncology program and Deputy Associate Director for Clinical Research at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. He also is active in the National Cancer Institute Colon Cancer Task Force, the FDA Oncologic Drug Advisory Committee, and the National Comprehensive Cancer Network panel for neuroendocrine cancers. Oh gosh, Dr. Lieu, you're not busy at all. That's a long way of saying he knows what he's talking about, and he's a really great guy too. So thank you for being here, Dr. Lieu, and we'll pass the controls to you to get started.
Thank you so much, Marianne. And for everybody that's in the audience, it can only go downhill from here after hearing Christy's story And Christy, you should know I was born and raised in Mooresville, North Carolina, which is just 20 minutes just north of where you are. So love the Tar Heel State. And just thank you, everybody, for being interested in biomarkers for colorectal cancer. We are going to be talking about a lot, but first, we are going to need your participation. And so, as Marianne mentioned, as we got started, there's a QR code if you guys are tech savvy and know how to use a QR code. There's also, you can just go to www.menti.com. You can do this on the computer, tablet, or your phone. I've put a code in here. You're going to see that as well. But I just wanted to give you the heads up that I'm going to ask you initially for some of your thoughts. And then we're going to go into a lot of the nitty gritty when we talk about, what do people mean when they talk about biomarkers? And then we'll definitely leave some time for questions and would just love to hear from you. So do this on your phone. Just a quick heads up. These are my disclosures. I have consulting contracts with Amgen, Pfizer, Natera, and some research funding from Merck or Genentech, but you're not going to hear anything about these companies during the course of my talk. So what are we going to talk about over the next 20 to 25 minutes? Just a brief primer on what it is that we mean when we're talking about biomarkers. What does that terminology mean? How does that impact biology and treatment for patients with metastatic colorectal cancer? There are a lot of different types of biomarker testing. This is a very complex field. It's also fairly new, as we'll talk about the history a little bit about biomarker testing. There's some challenges in terms of biomarker testing for cancers, and then we're gonna go through some examples. You heard a phenomenal one from Christy. We got this biomarker testing on her colorectal cancer. It showed that the tumor was RAS wild type. What does that mean? Right. So we're actually going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about two new targets for colorectal cancer with FDA application. I will tell you, we're going to have a lot of medical terminology here. We're going to talk a lot about the specifics of biomarker testing, but it really kind of comes down to just a handful of questions we want every patient to ask their doctor. And so you're going to see those slides kind of scattered about the course of the talk. Okay. So with that, first, we are going to ask for some audience participation. So this is our test question, our pre-question to kind of determine if we know how to use this program called Mentimeter. And again, if you you guys are already on top of it. Hopefully you're seeing this on the screen. Again, you can use the QR code that I showed you earlier, or you can just go to menti.com and the code is listed up top there, 49852671. And we know that the Olympics are coming up and they're going to start on Friday. And so would love to hear what your favorite sport is and what you're looking most forward to when it comes to the Olympics. And so we have a lot of responses. We already have 20 people responding, so thank you guys for answering this question. Okay, so this is a word cloud. We have a lot of people excited about gymnastics, swimming. We have some track and field, soccer, skateboarding. I think is a newer Olympic sport. I guess breakdancing is an Olympic sport now. All right, so you guys are definitely much more tech savvy, by the way, than even my fellows, because whenever I give a talk to my oncology fellows or trainees, I asked them to jump onto this, answer some questions, and you guys are already doing a much better job. Okay, well, great. Moving on to our next question. What words come to mind when thinking about biomarkers for colorectal cancer? And here you actually have the option to put in 3 answers. You can put in 1 and then submit. It doesn't really matter. But you don't have to you don't have to put in all 3. But would just love to kind of hear what you guys think about whenever you hear the term biomarkers for colorectal cancer. It can be, you're starting to see some answers come up here. Okay, immunotherapy, targeted treatment. We're going to talk about both of those. We have some answers saying that biomarkers are confusing, and it is. It's a very, very confusing landscape, I think. Wow, you guys, this is a very, very not only tech savvy but science savvy group. I'm seeing KRAS, P53. Those are genes. I see precision care, targeted therapies. All right, I'm gonna have to send this out actually to CCA after we're done. Not only just the Olympics, but I think that this is just a really, really cool word cloud. And so I can already tell this is a pretty savvy group that we're dealing with here. Thank you guys for answering this. Okay, moving on. Okay, so I know that there are a lot of patients and also caregivers that are on the call, but I would love to know whether or not you have had biomarker testing for colorectal cancer. If the answer is yes, no, and then I put in the answer I don't know, because when you ask several patients across the country, they may tell you that yes, they have had biomarker testing, no, they haven't had biomarker testing, or they don't know because it's a conversation that they haven't had. And part of the reason why we're having this webinar is to really answer that question. Okay, so looking at our responses here, we have 10 yeses, 13 nos, and then 6 I don't know. So, and I think that this is really representative of what we see across the country whenever we ask patients. We have a decent number of patients that say, I don't know. It's not a conversation that we've had. Some people just say, no, I haven't had testing. And we're going to talk about that. One of the questions is, does every patient with colorectal cancer need biomarker testing? And so this is the question. All patients with colorectal cancer should have biomarker testing regardless of stage. And this is not a trick question because the title of the webinar is called Biomarkers for Colorectal Cancer. But I would love to hear what people think about biomarker testing. And the question is worded in a specific way because later on in the talk, we are going to talk about, what does biomarker testing look like, definitely in a metastatic setting. I think everybody on this webinar would agree that biomarker testing really needs to be performed for all patients with metastatic colorectal cancer. But what does that mean if you have like stage 1 or stage 2 or even stage 3 colorectal cancer? Okay. And I think that is my last one. Oh, this is the last question. I feel knowledgeable about biomarker testing. And so this is a Likert scale from 0 to 10. And then you can pull that scale over. And then if you feel like a biomarker expert, you can do 10. If you feel like you've never heard of biomarkers before, you can say 1. And it seems like everybody who's answered this question so far is right around the middle. Okay, so I think that what I saw in the word cloud is an audience that certainly knows, I think, already something about biomarkers. Hopefully, we'll be able to add to that knowledge with this webinar. Okay. Thank you, guys. You guys are awesome. I should show my trainees your guys' responses. This is very, very cool. Okay, so I'm going to start with where we are for patients with metastatic colorectal cancer. What are the treatment options? And it's amazing that at earlier in my career, this used to be about 8 or 9 lines long, and now we're up to 19 approved regimens. And this really actually doesn't count for some of the regimens that actually have pan-tumor approval. And what I mean by that are drugs that are used to treat specific populations with a positive biomarker, regardless of what cancer that they have. And it's pretty remarkable that really even over the last couple of years, I'm going to show you evidence of this. There have been some FDA approvals that are based off of biomarkers, and that's what you're really seeing in numbers 11, 12, 13, and 14. So this is a list that has gotten a lot longer over the last several years, but we want it to be even longer as we learn more about biomarkers in colorectal cancer. And this slide really kind of shows you what the problem is in cancer just in general, but certainly has been the case for colorectal cancer. And that's a one-size-fits-all strategy. And a lot of times that strategy has really been focused on chemotherapy. And so it should not surprise us if we have patients that have different environmental exposures, different hereditary genetics, what we inherit from our parents, different tumors. Even though we call this all colorectal cancer, we know that the genetic makeup of each tumor is unique. And so we really shouldn't be surprised if we try one drug in a one-size-fits-all strategy, and maybe some people have really, really great outcomes with that drug, and other people don't, because we know that even though we call this colorectal cancer, every single person is unique, and even their tumors are unique. And so we need to kind of get to this place where we don't have a one-size-fits-all strategy, that maybe we can be fighting cancer on a higher level in a smarter way so that we target what makes each person's cancer unique. And in that way, we can offer a personalized therapy that leads to better outcomes. And so that leads us to biomarkers. Can we effectively personalize our therapy for our patients? And so when we talk about biomarker testing, this is just kind of a short term for biological markers, which could be biological molecules that are found in the blood, they can be found in tissue, they can be found in biopsy specimens. And this just provides us information about your tumor. Once biomarker testing is done, the results of that test may tell us whether a cell has normal or abnormal function. It can tell us how aggressive a cancer is. And we call this prognosis. What is the behavior of the cancer if it is just left untreated? It can sometimes, and this is what we would really love, predict the likelihood of a cancer's response to a specific treatment plan. Can we find out more information about a cancer that will help tell us, hey, this treatment is likely not to work versus this treatment is likely to work? And of course, the most important thing here is that we want this information to help you and your doctor make decisions about your care. There's a lot of terminology that gets thrown about on these lectures and these webinars. Certainly in the doctor's office, you're going to hear terms that you have never heard of. And doctors, for the most part, are usually really, really bad. And I'm guilty of this as well, of using terms that we use in everyday language when doctors are talking to doctors that our patients have no idea what that means, right? When we say, oh, this gene is mutated, and what does that mean? And if we talk about whether a gene is wild type, a lot of us weren't paying attention in biology 101 in like high school. And so, a lot of these terms come back, and we really need to kind of use these things in plain language. So when we talk about biomarker testing, that's very, very different than, say, genetic testing. Biomarkers are where we're trying to look specifically at the tumor, what those mutations look like, what are some of the alterations, and knowing full well that some of these mutations that we find in the cancer are helping the cancer to grow and metastasize. That is different than, say, genetic or hereditary testing. And this is the genetic sequence of the DNA that we're born with. And so this is what we are inheriting from our parents. And so it's tough because we talk about biomarker testing, you'll hear the term genetic testing. Traditionally, genetic testing is where we talk about what we inherited from our parents, whereas biomarker testing or tumor testing is looking specifically at the cancer. So more terminology. We can look at single gene testing. So even in the word cloud, we talked about KRAS, we saw P53, you heard Christy talk about RAS wild type. We're going to talk about what that means. But that just looks at an alteration in one gene. You're going to hear a lot of people say, has your tumor been sent for next generation sequencing or NGS? What does that mean? And that basically looking at a whole bunch of mutations at one time. So instead of looking at one gene like P53 or KRAS, we're just looking for sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of genes all at the same time using the same tumor biopsy or tumor sample. And then you're going to hear about circulating tumor DNA or cell-free DNA. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but these are fragments of tumor DNA that are just kind of circulating in your bloodstream. That's not harmful to the body, and your body gets rid of it within, sometimes minutes to hours. But if you draw the blood, you can sometimes detect the presence of tumor DNA even through just a simple blood draw, and we call that circulating tumor DNA. I put this list down and I try to come up with as many things as I thought that people might hear in their doctor's office. But when we talk about biomarker testing, you might hear this called genetic testing of your tumor. You might hear this called molecular testing, tumor testing, mutation testing. We talk about biomarker testing, molecular alterations, gene testing. A lot of this basically refers to the same thing. Can we test the tumor and do a mutational map of it? But if you hear this in a doctor's office, this is really what they're referring to. And so, again, it's hard to put all the terms that you might hear in a doctor's office, but this is something that, again, a list of what you might hear when somebody says, yeah, we need to send your tumor off for biomarker testing. This is not a field of medicine that has been around for a long time. Obviously, there's been a lot of interest in doing mutational maps, and you see this over decade experience of just trying to sequence the human genome, and that went from 1990 to 2003. And then we kind of get more into what cancer looks like in terms of the mutational map, the genetic map, and we call that the Cancer Genome Atlas, and that was from 2005 to 2017. And so when you look at the Precision Medicine Initiative, that started in 2015. The FDA approval of a gene panel test came about in 2017. So this is a really rapidly developing field. This is not a field that's been around since like the early 1900s. And really, our knowledge about cancer has exponentially increased, really, even over the last several years. And you're starting to see this become more and more incorporated into the practice of medicine in terms of treating cancer. Okay, so whenever we do biomarker testing, you may hear these terms biomarker negative, which is called wild type, which means that there's no mutation. Christy used that term, which that was such a great setup for this slide. She said, yeah, that biomarker testing said I was RAS wild type. Well, what does that mean? It means that there is no mutation in a gene called RAS or RAS. If somebody says that they're biomarker positive, that means that there's a mutation in that gene. And this is really what we're kind of trying to get to. And that is, if we have this whole host of patients that all have metastatic colorectal cancer, we know that every single genetic makeup of those patients and their tumors are very different. So can we do a next generation sequence-based gene panel test or NGS-based gene panel test? In other words, looking for hundreds upon hundreds of mutations all at the same time and start to separate patients out in terms of, hey, these patients have this genetic makeup, they should receive treatment A. These patients should receive treatment B. These patients should receive treatment C. And then, of course, the problem in a lot of cancers, including colorectal cancer, is that we just need better and more effective therapies. And so that's kind of what the bottom part of this figure is that, hey, we know that there are patients where genetic testing is done, but they're not yet actionable. What does that mean? It means it doesn't change the treatment pattern right now, but it might in the future as we learn more and better drugs and more effective drugs are developed. I'm going to show you molecular alterations in colorectal cancer and lung cancer, because in colorectal cancer, we're getting there in terms of offering personalized therapy. But number one, it's too slow. We want it to be faster. And number two, we want it to be a bigger part of the population. The reason why I'm showing you lung cancer is because that's kind of what we're trying to aspire to. Lung cancer has all these genetic alterations that they are now targeting, where a majority of patients are going to get a type of personalized or biomarker-directed therapy. What I'm showing you with colorectal cancer is that this pie chart just a decade ago just used to be like a 50-50 split, and there was just really almost no biomarkers to act on. And so you see that we're making progress in colorectal cancer, but I've highlighted two boxes where we really don't have effective drugs to treat those patients that have a majority of the KRAS mutations and PI3 kinase mutations. And so this is a chart to tell you a majority of patients with metastatic colorectal cancer, when they get biomarker testing, will not have something that we can act on right now. But number one, it's important for those patients that do have a biomarker-directed therapy available that's FDA approved to get those treatments. And number two, genetic information about your tumor may help your physician choose a clinical trial that is right for you. So again, this is the state of the field and the state of the art right now for colorectal cancer, but we want to get to the right side of this figure where a majority of our patients are receiving personalized biomarker-directed therapy. Just a quick note on what this looks like. As a physician, what I do is order the test, and then it goes into this kind of what I like to call pathology magic, where a lot of people do a lot of work, and then I get this report at the end of it. But in actuality, this is a very, very complex testing process that requires a lot of people doing their job incredibly well. And what this means is that if you're a patient that has colorectal cancer and that tumor has been taken out, or we have a biopsy of that tumor, it has to be processed in a very, very specific and complex way. So it gets placed basically into slides. That tissue is embedded into paraffin, so you see that on the screen in front of you. And then from there, they cut really, really small films of that block onto slides. And then we stain those slides and do further microscopic evaluation and laser microdissection. And then from there, the DNA starts to become processed, sequenced. And then with all of this happening kind of behind the scenes without you or me seeing any of this happen in action, you get this report. And that report is where I sit down in front of you and we go through what the report says and how it impacts your treatment. And so this is a very, very complex process. Just a quick note, can developing colon cancer on the left side of the colon or the right side of the colon be a biomarker for a response to therapy? And I will tell you that the answer is yes. The side that your colorectal cancer develops on actually can have an impact on the treatment that you receive. And so the answer is yes. Even the side that your colorectal cancer develops, whether it's on the left side, which encompasses rectal cancer, or on the right side, it can help your doctor and inform your doctor in terms of what might be the best treatment plan for you, because there's a class of medications that we're going to talk about that I'm sure Christy got, called an anti-EGFR inhibitor or epidermal growth factor receptor inhibitor, that works better if you have a left-sided tumor versus a right-sided tumor. Okay, so what are some of the types of testing? I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I don't want to get stuck in the nitty-gritty, but I want to tell you that there are a lot of ways to test tumors. One way is just to look at one mutation or one gene at a time. We call this kind of target or single gene sequencing, and that is, we have an interest in this one gene, we're going to test for this one gene. The reason why this is sometimes helpful is because you can usually do this in your hospital system that you are at locally, and you can get this answer usually very quick. So when we do this testing at Colorado, we can usually get the answer done within 5 days. But the problem is you're only looking at one gene at a time, and every single time you run a test on a tumor specimen, you use some of that tumor tissue up. And so the problem with that is that you can get rid of all the tumor very, very quickly by just kind of chopping it up and looking at one gene at a time. We talked about next generation sequencing, what we also call comprehensive genomic profiling, and that is just to use one tissue specimen to look at a ton of genes and alterations. And the beauty of this is that we get to get information on basically the entire mutational map of the tumor. But the downside of this is that it usually goes out to an outside company and can usually take about 3 to 4 weeks to get the answer back. Why is that a problem? Because our patients with newly diagnosed metastatic colorectal cancer don't want to wait a month or two to get this information back. They want treatment right now, as they should. And so sometimes you're instituting a treatment plan just to get started on treating the cancer, but you don't have this information available. Whenever we talk about circulating tumor DNA, again, we had a little bit of a discussion about what this looks like, but essentially whenever tumor cells turn over, they actually release fragments of circulating tumor DNA into the bloodstream. And you can actually detect this just by drawing blood. And so, one of the things that you may hear about is that, hey, we can always draw your blood and try to do a mutational map really off of the circulating tumor DNA. And the reason why this is sometimes helpful, and again, you're going to hear a lot about circulating tumor DNA or cell-free DNA, even in areas outside of cancer, because there's a lot of interest in looking at this as a screening prevention measure, or to even just screen for multiple cancers at the same time. But it can tell you whether or not there's the presence of cancer just by detecting the ctDNA or not. But you can also look at why a treatment may be working or not working in a metastatic disease setting. Because like I said, the circulating tumor DNA usually gets metabolized within hours. And so it can give you a very good real-time look of what's happening inside the body at that time. And so a lot of times we use blood-based testing if we don't have access to the tissue. And it also may be more reflective of real-time molecular changes. But of course, number one, the panel of genes with these assays are usually not typically as big as what we test with tumors. And again, some of this just depends on our ability to even find the tumor DNA in the blood, which is not always possible. So I'm going to show you, I know we're going to be running a little bit short on time here in a little bit, but this is the most important slide I could show you. And that is number one. The mutation makeup of every single tumor is unique. And number two, knowing a tumor's biomarker status may help the selection of the most appropriate and effective treatment plan possible. And I think you heard a great example of that with Christy's story. The best test, and because there are a lot of companies that do this and a lot of methods of testing, which I just talked to you about, but the best test is the one that just gets done. I will tell you that in colorectal cancer, most alterations or mutations that you find when you get the report, they are not actionable, and I will say yet, because as we know more and more about cancer and have access to more and more effective drugs, this is something that I think will change dramatically over the coming years. And then this is the most important part. Talk with your doctor about biomarker testing. And this is the conversation that every oncologist should want to have with their patients. Number one, has my tumor been tested for biomarkers? Number two, if not, will it be tested for biomarkers? And if it has, are any biomarkers actionable, and how will they impact my treatment plan? If you go to your doctor and ask those three questions, it will always be a conversation that will inform you about not only your cancer, but what available options are possible in your treatment plan. There are some challenges here. I will say the biggest ones are kind of the bottom four, and that is the ordering rate across the country ranges somewhere between 50 to 70% in patients with metastatic colorectal cancer. So this is something that we would love to see increase, although I will tell you that many oncologists do a great job of ordering biomarker testing. This is a rapidly evolving field, and the technology continues to get better and better, and that is a very, very exciting thing. Testing turnaround time is something that we all struggle with because we want to get that information right away. It can sometimes take about 3 to 4 weeks to get that information back. And so we would love for that testing turnaround time to get faster. But the biggest thing is have that discussion with your doctor. Okay. I'm going to go through some examples of how we use biomarkers in the frontline setting fairly quickly. We can come back to this, but I really want to be cognizant of your time because I want to answer some of the questions that have already come through the Q&A. So feel free, again, to put it through the question and answer in the Zoom meeting. We'll try to get to as many as we can. But I really want to make this point that Christy brought up about her tumor. So Christy said her tumor had no mutation in KRAS or NRAS. And the reason why this is important is because there are targeted therapies that can target this receptor called epidermal growth factor receptor. And those drugs are called cetuximab and panitumumab. And why this is important is because we know that these drugs can shut down a growth factor pathway that is critical for colorectal cancer. But what I've highlighted here with the red arrow is a mutation in RAS. And the reason why that's important is because if you have a mutation there, you can imagine you can block the receptor as much as you want, but if the on signal is on below, it's kind of like trying to stop a waterfall and kind of stopping it up top, but then there's another source of water coming in below it. So you can kind of stop it as much as you want, but if there's another source of water coming down, you're going to continue to see that water flow, and that's what happens. Activated RAS, KRAS, or NRAS kind of leads to reactivation of that pathway, and we know if patients receive this treatment, and they have a mutation in KRAS or NRAS, that they don't receive any anti-tumor benefit, but they get all the side effects from the treatment. And so this is the reason why, hey, if there's no mutation in RAS, we should use these drugs, and we know that there could be a better outcome. So there was actually a clinical trial trying to answer this question of using chemotherapy plus the targeted therapy panitumumab. And what they found was that if the tumor was left-sided and had no mutations in some of the resistance genes that we mentioned, KRAS, NRAS, and there are a whole host of other genes that can confer resistance to this, we know that those patients had a 20% increase in overall survival when the drug panitumumab was given to these specific patients. And so that's just a really great example, and you're seeing the example right now with Christy, of using that genomic information to select the best treatment for her. And again, this is really, really critical, I think, for all patients that, again, have this mutational profile. Immunotherapy came up in the word cloud. How do we use biomarkers in the frontline setting? We use a biomarker called microsatellite instability to select the patients that may benefit most from immunotherapy. And it really is as simple as this. When the tumor cannot spell check its own DNA, that's what we call deficient mismatch repair, it acquires a lot of mutations. And so if you're MSI high or deficient mismatch repair, your tumor has, say, 1,800 mutations versus a normal colorectal cancer, which has somewhere between 30 and 70 mutations. It is what we call hypermutated. And again, it's not a big proportion of our patient population, but it is a critical 4%. And the reason why is because the immune system starts to get attracted to these hypermutated mutated tumors. And that's what you see with these kind of dark spots on this slide, are T cells actually inside of the cancer. We just have to turn them on. And so there's a class of immunotherapies that are really designed to just turn on T cells. That's all the job of these immunotherapies do. You've probably seen a lot of ads for these, and obviously it's a hot topic of conversation. But what we saw in a clinical trial of chemotherapy versus immunotherapy is this result. And that is, by 1 year, only 21% of patients receiving chemotherapy did not have any tumor growth. And compare that to immunotherapy, where at 12 months, 80% of those patients had no tumor growth. At 24 months, 72% of those patients had no tumor growth. And you see this kind of long tail of this curve saying that there are a lot of patients here whose tumors are not growing for years on immunotherapy. Is it perfect? No. And it's not a very, very high proportion of our patients. It's just 4%. But you can imagine how important this information is for 1 out of every 25 patients that we treat with colorectal cancer. So some take-home points. Early biomarker testing is critical for appropriate treatment selection. We've talked about this idea of using drugs like cetuximab and panitumumab for patients just like Christy, where they don't have mutation in these specific genes, and is now considered to be standard of care. We talked about immunotherapy, and hopefully this gives you kind of an idea of why biomarker testing is so important in terms of treatment selection for our patients. We're running short on time, so I'm going to go through just 2 examples very, very quickly, just because they're exciting and they're brand new. I'm going to kind of go through a lot of these slides, and I'm just going to skip through a decent amount, but I also want to kind of show you, just last month, the FDA approved therapy with these 2 drugs, adagrasib and cetuximab, for patients with a specific KRAS mutation, KRAS G12C. And again, only 3% of our patient population. But again, for that 3% of our patient population that has a KRAS mutation, there is now an FDA-approved therapy that was just approved literally a couple of weeks ago. And I'm going to kind of end with this biomarker, HER2 amplification, which again is present in about 3 to 4% of our patients. This is from April 2024, also January 2023. There are 2 new approved regimens for patients with HER2 positive metastatic colorectal cancer, trastuzumab in combination with tucatinib, or trastuzumab deruxtecan. So just again, some other targeted therapy options, and this literally has all happened in some cases the last couple of weeks, or in some cases the last just the last 1 or 2 years. So again, this is the landscape of what genomic markers look like in colorectal cancer. Again, we're going to start to see this pie increasingly cut up, where we can offer more and more personalized therapy to our patients. But again, I'm going to end with this one slide, and that is just the 3 questions, right? Has my tumor been tested for biomarkers? If not, will it be? And if the answer is yes, then how will that potentially change the treatment plan that I receive? All right, so with that, I'll turn it back over to Marianne. Sorry for any technical difficulties, and we're happy to take any questions. I'm sure Christy would as well. Oh, and Marianne, you're muted.
Dr. Lieu, that was so good, so powerful. But you know what you also did is you gave so much hope. That, I mean, just at the end, knowing about these new treatments coming and know about personalized medicine like this is just so exciting. And I know I speak for everybody on the panel or the listening, that thank you so much for sharing all that information. And you put it in terms that we can understand. It was scientific, but you do such a great job at putting it at a personal level. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. And again, we should probably schedule a follow-up.
Yes, I think so. This could go on a very long time, and we're all very interested. So yeah. we're gonna call you back.
The biggest thing is it really is. I mean, my gosh, how many letters can we combine to talk about different genes? KRAS, NRAS, HER2, even specific isoforms of KRAS. And so. And there are like a million different companies that do this type of testing, and the field is rapidly evolving. Yeah. And so I think the key really is, and you heard this in Christy's story, number one, just ask, right, about biomarker testing. And number two, it's always good to get a second opinion and to show your report to other doctors. And I say that even for my own patients, right? You should go and get another opinion because I wish the day I cure cancer, I'll be as cocky as possible.
Yeah.
But until that happens, we need to work together as a team. So I love it when my patients get a second opinion because then I get another set of eyes. And maybe that doctor has thought about something that I haven't thought about. And so, it is okay to get a second opinion. It's okay to ask these questions because I love it. When my patients ask this question, it gives me an opportunity to sit down with my patients and really go through the report. And that is an opportunity to have just a more in-depth conversation about what I'm thinking about how I'm going to treat somebody's cancer.
Right. Thank you for giving that permission. I think patients and families and caregivers, they get a little intimidated or worried that if they ask a doctor a question that they're going to be a bad patient or that, they won't get the care that they are supposed to get. So they're just so nervous. And so thank you for just permission and normalizing that the patient needs to be their own advocate as well. And so thank you for that. We have a couple questions with the 9 minutes we have left. But Christy, I have a quick question for you. Somebody asked how long your treatment was.
Yes. So I had a total of 12 rounds of treatment. I was about to start treatment when my tumor was sent off for testing. So that very first round did not include the targeted based therapy.
Okay.
It started with the second round and then continued for the total of like I said, 12. So, and I'm no longer on treatment. It was just, I ended that, what did I say, February, almost 5 years ago. And I just have to say, Dr. Lieu, this presentation was absolutely amazing. I connect with survivors all the time and I say to them, find out, have your tumor tested. And this is really hard what I have to share, but I have several that I connected with that were also going through treatment when I was going through treatment, all also in their early 40s, kids, spouses, and their oncologists wouldn't do it. Or when they did, it was late in the game when tumors were growing or recurrences were happening, and all of those patients have passed away. And it's really just devastating. And so I'm such an advocate for having tumors tested. And I don't know anyone else that is until now. Apparently, there's a big push on this, which is phenomenal. And you'll be happy to hear I got a second, third, and fourth opinion when I was diagnosed.
Thank you, Christy. And that just reminds me that for those that are listening, if they ever have barriers or challenges talking to their physician or don't know how to go about getting tested, please call us. In patient navigation, we help walk patients through that experience, try to reduce the barriers, coach and educate to try to help them talk to their doctors. But we also have programs that can help get patients biomarker tested as well. So please call us on the helpline and we can talk to you about that too. Okay. Dr. Lieu, even though you said to ask those questions, but what should a patient do? What would be their next step if they weren't tested for biomarkers?
I would say one of the questions that I asked initially in the Mentimeter, and thank you guys again for participating in it. That was so cool to see. Number one, not necessarily every patient with colorectal cancer has to get biomarker testing. And I make the argument always with stage 1 colorectal cancer. Now, number one, everybody should have genetic testing, right? Especially our early onset colorectal cancer, survivors. That's just a really, really just important point is to talk to your oncologist about, hey, is there a hereditary cause of my cancer? But besides that, do we need to do full genomic sequencing of stage 1 colorectal cancer? No, mainly because it's not going to change what I'm going to do, which is honestly just watch you, right? And so I only want to get a test unless it's going to change what I do. But for metastatic colorectal cancer, yeah, everybody should get biomarker testing, right? And I'm a firm believer in that. And so the question really is, hey, if you haven't tested my tumor for biomarkers, just tell me why, right? And there may be a really great reason, right? And we're not going to cover all the reasons why to or not to, but that's a good question to ask. And then if you're not satisfied with the answer, then you should seek a second opinion, right? Again, just like my patients, I love it when they see second opinions, just to kind of get an answer in terms of why it hasn't or why it will be. And so always start with just asking the question, though.
Thank you. You helped me when I got diagnosed at stage 1, and you helped me understand if I need to be tested or not. So thank you for that. And that helps our participants understand as well. The next question is CEA a biomarker?
Great question. It is, right? It tells you something a little bit about the tumor. I will tell you that we're very frustrated with CEA because sometimes CEA is high and there's no cancer. Sometimes it's low and there is cancer. And so it's not perfect. And so we use CEA as a tool. It is a biomarker because it gives you information about the cancer. Is it perfect? No. And I always tell my patients, please don't, freak out about the CEA. We use it as a tool. If it's continuously increasing, it's cause for concern, but it's not definitive. And just because it's normal doesn't necessarily mean that the cancer is all gone either. So it's just one of the tools that we use, but it's not a definitive, oh, this is absolutely what's happening. So it is a biomarker, though.
Okay, great. Thank you. There was a comment that I just want to kind of bring up, and I know you hear this about your patients and families, is it seems like insurance coverage for biomarker testing is a challenge. Any recommendations, any suggestions with that?
I think the FDA approval that we saw in 2017 was a huge deal in terms of saying, okay, the FDA believes in this, it should be covered. I will tell you that it is a big deal. I agree with whoever put that into the Q&A. And what I would also say is that there's a lot of financial assistance here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, knock on wood, I've never had a patient actually sent to collections reporting a biomarker test. So I think that may be an unusual experience, but I think that our team and the companies do a good job of making sure that there's no financial toxicity to this. I know that's not always the case, but this is also the reason why CCA is so amazing at what it does, because you guys have also helped with this a lot.
Thank you. I was going to say that too. So yeah, so please call us if you're having trouble with insurance and getting tested. We can help walk through that with you. And then it looks like this is a kind of a longer statement question. If you have no genetic mutation, no family history, and none of the high risk factors such as eating red meat, alcohol, obesity, etc., what is the best way to determine what caused the cancer so you can best fight it and prevent recurrence?
It's such a great question.
Yeah.
And as I'm sure Christy will tell you, I mean, right, there's probably nothing in her history which suggested that she should have ever developed colorectal cancer. And unfortunately, this is the case with a lot of our early onset patients, where I've had Division I athletes and triathletes and people who put me to shame, right, in terms of their health. And it really goes to show you that sometimes there's no rhyme or reason and there's no clear cause. Having said that, the prevention is, as it always is, a lot of the things that we learn very early in life, and that is, exercise. I believe strongly in the diversification of the gut microbiome, which is a totally other talk, right?
Yes.
But high in fruits and vegetables and fiber, and there are a lot of lifestyle changes that we know are associated with just decreased risk of any cancer, but that's still the best way to fight it and prevent it.
Thank you. And then it looks like we have one more, and so it says, so post-treatment, is biomarker testing appropriate? How do we go about getting this testing if we need it post-treatment?
Right. It's something I'm sure Christy is also very, very interested in. And this is a very, very evolving field. Right now, there really isn't any recommended steps. I will tell you that what we talked about, cell-free DNA and circulating tumor DNA, is an emerging field of research trying to answer this question of whether that testing can help save lives. I don't think we know the answer to that, right? But can we use a test like that in combination with CEA and CT scans to determine if we can find cancer earlier, recurrence earlier? And if we find recurrence earlier, can we save lives? And that's a question that has not been answered, but we will see a lot more data even in the coming months about that.
It's so many exciting things happening, new treatments getting approved just in the last couple months, and all that we're learning about biomarkers and improving outcomes and quality of life. So thank you so much, Dr. Lieu. And Christy, absolutely, your story is so powerful. Thank you for sharing. That is all the time we have for it. We ended perfect. Thank you again, Dr. Lieu and Christy, for spending time with us. For the people continuing to watch, you can access this video later on our website and just search for CRC Talks. Thank you, everybody that has been attending, and please stick around to answer the post-talk survey. Your participation is really important as we grow this program. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Thanks again, Dr. Lieu and Christy. Thank you.